They're not accusations if they're true, I said, keeping my distance. I know about the trust fund, Dad. I know about the car. The condo in Portland. Everything. My mother dabbed at invisible tears. You don't understand, sweetheart. We were protecting you. From what? Financial independence? The chance to live my own life. My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. From yourself, she snapped, the mask of concern slipping. You've always been impractical, head in the clouds. Just like your grandfather. You mean creative? Independent? Unwilling to be controlled. I cross my arms. Those sound like qualities to celebrate, not stifle. My father stood, straightening his expensive jacket. The trust fund was established when you were a minor. As your parents, we had every right to manage those assets as we saw fit. After I turned 18? I challenged. After I turned 21? What about now, Dad? I'm 26. What's your excuse for forging my signature? For selling property in my name? A flicker of unease crossed his face. There were certain legal arrangements that gave us authority. You mean the fake power of attorney? The one with another forged signature? My mother's face hardened. We did what we had to do. That old man was going to give you everything with no strings attached. You'd have squandered it all. That was his choice to make. It was my money to squander if I wanted to. I felt a strange calm settling over me. Get out of my apartment. This apartment that we helped you get? My father countered. With the security deposit we paid? With MY money. I corrected him. Every penny you've helped me with came from the trust fund Grandpa set up for me. Money you stole. They left eventually, but not before my mother threw one last barb. Your grandfather won't live forever, Laurel. When he's gone, who will you have? Think about that before you destroy this family. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the moments when my life could have gone differently. The prestigious art school I'd been accepted to but couldn't afford, except I could have. The internship in New York I'd turned down because my parents had convinced me it was too expensive to live there when I'd had the means all along. The relationship with Nathan that had crumbled under the weight of financial stress and my inability to move forward with our plans. My entire adult life had been built on a foundation of lies. The next day, I drove to the storage facility where I kept boxes of old paperwork my parents had helped me organize after college. In the back of a dusty bin, I found loan documents with interest rates much higher than I remembered agreeing to. I found bank statements showing withdrawals I'd never made. I found a life that had been orchestrated without my knowledge or consent. When I returned to Grandpa's cottage, I found him sitting on the porch with a man in a crisp suit. Laurel, this is Thomas Kellum, Grandpa said. He was our family attorney for many years until your father. Well, until he wasn't anymore. Mr. Kellum stood, offering his hand. I've been waiting a long time to meet you, Miss Everhart. Over iced tea, Mr. Kellum explained how my father had gradually pushed him out of handling the family's legal affairs about 3 years ago. I had concerns about some of the documents I was being asked to process, he said carefully, particularly regarding your grandfather's estate planning and your trust fund. Did you know they were forging my signature? I asked. He looked uncomfortable. I suspected impropriety. I couldn't prove it, but when I raised concerns, your father terminated our firm's services rather abruptly. He slid a business card across the table. I've since started my own practice. If you're looking to take legal action, I'd be honored to represent you. Pro bono. Later, after Mr. Kellum had gone, I sat with Grandpa on his porch swing, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of orange and gold. I always thought I was doing something wrong. I admitted that there was some flaw in me that kept me from succeeding, from moving forward. I couldn't understand why everything felt so stuck. Grandpa put his arm around me, and I leaned into him like I had as a child. You were never flawed, Laurel. You were just trapped, but not anymore. I'm scared, I whispered. Of what, sweetheart? Of finding out how deep this goes. Of confronting them. Of losing my family, as dysfunctional as they are. Grandpa was quiet for a long moment. Family isn't just blood, Laurel. It's trust. It's honesty. It's wanting what's best for each other, even when it means letting go. He squeezed my shoulder. I should have protected you better. I saw signs over the years, but dismissed them. I won't make that mistake again. That night, I made a decision. I would fight, not just for the money, though I needed and deserved it, but for the life that had been stolen from me. For the years of independence I should have had. For the confidence that had been systematically undermined. The next morning, I called Mr. Kellum and told him I wanted to proceed with legal action. Then I called a locksmith to change the locks on my apartment. Finally, I called my childhood friend Willa, who worked as a forensic accountant. "Laurel?" she answered, surprised. "It's been ages." "I need your help," I said. "It's complicated and messy, and probably illegal." There was a pause, then Willa laughed. "You had me at complicated. When can we meet?" As I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of possibility, of doors opening instead of closing. My parents had stolen my inheritance, my opportunities, even my signature. But they had never managed to take the one thing that mattered most, my determination to build a life that was truly mine. The law offices of Kellum and Associates occupied the third floor of a renovated brick building in downtown Mapleton. As I stepped through the door, a wave of anxiety washed over me. Was I really about to take my own parents to court? Ms. Everhart? A woman with close-cropped silver hair and kind eyes approached, extending her hand. "I'm Jacinda Marr. Thomas speaks very highly of you." Unlike the corporate attorneys my father favored, all power suits and aggressive handshakes, Jacinda had a quiet confidence that immediately put me at ease. She led me to a conference room where Mr. Kellum was waiting with a stack of folders and a sympathetic smile. "Before we begin," Jacinda said, taking a seat across from me, "I want you to understand what you're getting into. Family lawsuits are messy, emotionally draining, and rarely quick. Are you prepared for that?" I thought of the years stolen from me, the opportunities lost, the lies that had shaped my entire adult life. "I'm done letting them control my narrative," I said firmly. "I want my name, my money, and my independence back." Jacinda nodded, seemingly satisfied with my resolve. "Then let's begin." Over the next 3 hours, we outlined my case: breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of assets, identity fraud, and forgery. My parents had violated not just my trust, but also numerous laws. "The good news," Mr. Kellum said, "is that your grandfather's meticulous record-keeping gives us a solid foundation. The bad news is that your parents have had years to cover their tracks. They've likely moved assets, created false paper trails, maybe even destroyed evidence," Jacinda added. "We need to move quickly before they can hide more." By the end of the meeting, a plan was in place. Jacinda would file for emergency injunctions to freeze assets related to my trust. Mr. Kellum would handle communications with my parents' legal team. And I would begin the painful process of documenting every instance of financial manipulation I could remember. As we wrapped up, Jacinda handed me her card with her personal cell number written on the back. "Financial abuse is still abuse, Laurel. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." 2 days later, the subpoenas began to fly. My parents, Elliot, their banks, the car dealership, the realty company that had handled the Portland condo, all were ordered to preserve records and provide documentation. My father's first response was to hire Preston Wallace, the most aggressive attorney in the state. "They're taking this seriously," Grandpa observed when I told him. We were sitting on his porch swing, watching a summer storm roll across the lake. He'd insisted I stay with him during the legal battle, offering both emotional support and a safe distance from my parents. "Did you expect anything less from Dad?" I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt.
"No."
Grandpa's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his tea. "Dwight has always been strategic." I'd noticed Grandpa seeming more fragile lately, moving more slowly, forgetting small things. When I'd mentioned it, he'd brushed off my concerns. "Just tired, Laurel girl. Nothing to worry about." But I was worried. The stress of the lawsuit couldn't be good for him. A week into the legal proceedings, Elliot called me. I nearly declined, but curiosity won out. "Laurel," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I want to help." I laughed bitterly. "You've helped enough, don't you think?" "No, I mean it. I'll testify." About everything. The car, the condo, the forged documents, all of it. My grip on the phone tightened. Why this sudden change of heart? Guilty conscience finally catching up with you? Partly, he admitted. But also, Jessica is pregnant. We're having a little girl. His voice cracked. I keep thinking about what Dad did, what I helped him do. I couldn't bear it if someone treated my daughter that way. I wanted to stay angry, to tell him it was too little, too late. But something in his voice, a vulnerability I hadn't heard since we were children, made me pause. What exactly are you offering? I asked cautiously. Everything I know. Names, dates, accounts. In exchange for not pressing charges against me. He took a shaky breath. I know I don't deserve it. But I want to make this right, Laurel. I really do. That evening, I met with Jacinda to discuss Elliot's offer. She was skeptical, but practical. His testimony could break this case wide open, she admitted. And your parents would have a harder time dismissing him as confused or vindictive. Within days, Elliot had signed an immunity agreement and provided a sworn statement detailing years of financial manipulation. The document was damning, outlining not just the car and trust fund, but smaller thefts I hadn't even discovered yet. Birthday checks from relatives that never reached me. A small inheritance from a great-aunt. Even royalties from a children's book illustration I'd done in college. They really didn't leave anything untouched, did they? I said to Jacinda, as we reviewed Elliot's statement. She squeezed my shoulder. People like your parents don't know when to stop. That's how they get caught. The case was building momentum when a local journalist named Sarah Reeves reached out. She'd heard whispers about the lawsuit and wanted to interview me for a piece on financial abuse within families. I don't know, I told Grandpa that night. Going public feels exposing. It's your decision, he said gently. But remember, secrecy has only ever protected them, not you. Before I could decide, another bombshell dropped. During a routine search of Grandpa's home office, we found a locked safe behind a painting of the lake. Inside was a letter, dated 1 week after his stroke, addressed to me and notarized by his hospital nurse. My dearest Laurel, it began. If you're reading this, something has gone wrong. The car is just the beginning. There's a trust fund in your name with Meridian Bank, account number 87259-34B. There's also a condo in Portland, paid in full, waiting for you to claim it. These gifts come with no strings attached, only my love and my belief in your bright future. Trust no one but Thomas Kellum with these matters. Your loving Grandpa. The letter included account numbers, property details, even the VIN for the BMW. It was everything we needed, concrete proof that Grandpa's gifts were real and intentional. Why didn't you tell me about the safe? I asked him, my voice thick with emotion. Grandpa looked embarrassed. I forgot about it, to be honest. The stroke, it affected my memory more than I like to admit. He touched the letter with trembling fingers. But I knew something wasn't right. I knew I had to leave a trail for you to find. When Jacinda filed the letter with the court, my parents' defense began to crumble. Their attorney requested a meeting. They want to settle, Jacinda informed me. Quietly, out of court. No, I said immediately. I want us on record. I want a judge to hear what they did. The day before our first major court appearance, my mother showed up at Grandpa's cottage alone. She looked smaller somehow, her designer clothes hanging loosely on her frame, dark circles under her eyes. 5 minutes, I said, stepping onto the porch and closing the door behind me. That's all you get. Laurel, please. Her voice broke. You have to understand. I was trying to protect you. From what? Independence? Happiness? From making mistakes. From wasting your potential on pipe dreams. She was crying now, mascara tracking down her cheeks. You don't understand what it's like to watch your child about to throw everything away. On art school? On moving to Portland? On living my own life? I cut in. Those weren't mistakes, Mom. They were my choices. Choices you stole from me. Your father, she began. Don't blame Dad. You were both in this together. She collapsed onto the porch swing, suddenly looking every one of her 58 years. Elias always favored you, she whispered. My own father. He never believed in me the way he believed in you. Do you know what that feels like? To know your father thinks your child has more potential than you ever did. For a moment, I glimpsed the wounded daughter beneath my mother's controlling exterior. But sympathy wouldn't change what she'd done. That doesn't justify stealing from me, I said quietly. Nothing does. She left without another word, her shoulders hunched in defeat. I watched her drive away, feeling hollow rather than vindictive. There were no winners in this fight, only various degrees of losing. The next day in court, my father was cold and composed, staring straight ahead as Elliot testified against him. My mother couldn't stop crying. I sat between Jacinda and Grandpa, focusing on breathing steadily as years of deception were laid bare for the record. When my mother took the stand, she broke down completely. She was always so special, she sobbed, gesturing toward me. So talented. Elias saw it. Dwight saw it. Everyone saw it. I wanted to keep her close. Safe. I was afraid if she had all that money, all that freedom, she'd leave and never come back. So you stole from her? Jacinda asked, her voice gentle but unyielding. We borrowed, my mother insisted. We were going to pay it back. But then there were emergencies, and Elliot needed help with his house. And did you forge Laurel Everhart's signature on legal documents? Jacinda interrupted. My mother's silence was answer enough. Unlike his wife, my father showed no remorse on the stand. He spoke of managing family assets responsibly and protecting my daughter from impulsive decisions. When questioned about the forgeries, he claimed they were done, with implied consent as her father. The judge's expression grew increasingly stern throughout his testimony. By the time my father announced his intention to countersue me for emotional distress, I could tell we had won. The final day of testimony brought a surprise witness, Willa Matthews, my childhood friend who now worked as a forensic accountant. I hadn't seen her in years, not since my parents had discouraged our friendship after high school. Ms. Matthews, what did your analysis of the Everhart family finances reveal? Jacinda asked. Willa glanced at me apologetically before answering. A systematic pattern of financial abuse spanning approximately 8 years, she stated, her professional demeanor belying our personal connection. Based on the records provided, Laurel Everhart has been defrauded of approximately $427,685 in diverted funds, not including potential interest or investment returns. The courtroom fell silent. It was even worse than I'd imagined. As court adjourned for the judge's deliberation, Jacinda squeezed my hand. It's going to be okay, she whispered. We've won. Now we just wait to see how much. 3 weeks after the final testimony, we returned to court for the verdict. I wore a simple blue dress I'd bought myself, the first piece of clothing I'd purchased without worrying about my parents' approval in years. In the case of Everhart versus Everhart, Judge Michaels began, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Laurel Everhart. Relief flooded through me so powerfully that I nearly missed the rest of his words. The judgment was comprehensive. Full restoration of all misappropriated funds with interest, return of any remaining assets purchased with my money, and punitive damages for the forgery and fraud. All told, nearly $500,000 would be returned to me. My father stormed out of the courtroom without looking at me. My mother tried to approach, but Jacinda stepped between us, a quiet guardian I hadn't known I needed until she appeared in my life. This isn't over, my mother whispered as she passed. Family is forever, Laurel. It sounded more like a threat than a reassurance. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered. Word of the unusual family fraud case had spread. I declined to comment, but watching my father shield his face from cameras as he hurried to his car brought a strange sense of vindication. For once, he couldn't control the narrative. The weeks following the verdict were a blur of paperwork, bank meetings, and adjusting to my new reality. My father disappeared from family life entirely, reportedly taking a consulting position overseas. My mother alternated between tearful pleas for reconciliation and cold accusations of betrayal. I stayed at Grandpa's cottage, helping care for him as his health continued to decline. Despite my concerns, he insisted on accompanying me to every important meeting. "I'm not missing another moment of your life, Laurel girl," he'd say, patting my hand with his increasingly frail one. The truth was I needed him there. Each step toward independence felt both exhilarating and terrifying. After years of subtle manipulation, I second-guessed even the simplest decisions. Grandpa's steady presence helped anchor me when I felt adrift. One rainy afternoon, as we reviewed investment options for my newly recovered funds, Grandpa had a coughing fit that wouldn't stop. His lips turned blue, and I called an ambulance, my heart pounding with fear. "Pneumonia," the doctor explained later in the hospital corridor. "And his heart is weaker than his last checkup indicated." "Has he been under unusual stress recently?" I thought of the court case, the family fracture, the months of fighting. "Yes," I admitted. "A lot of stress." "Well, he's stable for now, but he needs rest. Real rest." The doctor's expression was kind but serious. "And probably some help at home when he's discharged." That night, sitting beside Grandpa's hospital bed, watching the monitors track his heartbeat, I made a decision. I would move in with him permanently, at least until he recovered. It was time I took care of him for a change. When I told him my plan the next morning, he smiled weakly. "Always looking after others, aren't you? Just like when you were little." He squeezed my hand. "But you've got your own life to build now." "You are my life, Grandpa. My real family." 2 days after Grandpa came home from the hospital, Elliot showed up at the cottage. I nearly shut the door in his face, but something in his expression stopped me. "I'm not here to make excuses," he said quickly. I want to help with Grandpa." And he hesitated, then thrust an envelope toward me. "Jessica and I are having a girl. We want to name her Laurel after you, if that's okay." I stared at the ultrasound photo inside the envelope, this tiny being who would share my name. "Why?" I asked, genuinely confused. "After everything that happened?" Elliot looked down. "Because you're the strongest person I know. And I want my daughter to be strong too." He swallowed hard. "I'm in therapy now, trying to understand why I went along with Mom and Dad for so long. Why I betrayed you. I don't expect forgiveness, Laurel. I just want a chance to be better." I didn't forgive him that day or the next. But gradually, as he showed up reliably to help with Grandpa, as he shared insights from his therapy about our parents' manipulation tactics, as he worked to make amends in small, consistent ways, a crack opened in the wall I'd built against him. One evening, after Elliot had left, Grandpa watched me washing dishes with a thoughtful expression. "Forgiveness isn't about them deserving it, you know," he said quietly. "It's about freeing yourself from carrying the weight of their wrongs." I dried my hands slowly. "I don't know if I'm ready for that yet." "That's okay too." He smiled sadly. "Some wounds need time." Time passed. Grandpa had good days and bad days. I established a home office in the cottage's sunroom and began taking freelance design projects, building a portfolio independent of my father's connections. For the first time, my work truly reflected my creative vision rather than what would please my parents or their friends. A certified letter arrived one morning, addressed to me in my mother's elegant handwriting. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a 10-page handwritten letter, tear-stained in places. My mother wrote of her own difficult childhood, of the ways her father's high expectations had shaped her, of how she'd projected her insecurities onto me. She described her jealousy of my relationship with Grandpa Elias, her fear of abandonment, her gradual descent into controlling behavior that she'd justified as protection. "None of this excuses what I did," she wrote near the end. "I'm seeing a therapist now. She says I have narcissistic tendencies that I've never addressed. I don't know if I can change at my age, but I want to try. Not to win you back. I don't deserve that, but because I never want to hurt anyone the way I hurt you." I read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and put it away. I didn't respond, but I didn't throw it away either. Someday, I might be ready to read it again. Meanwhile, I was building connections of my own choosing. Willa and I rekindled our friendship, meeting weekly for coffee and conversation. Jacinda became a mentor, helping me navigate my new financial independence with wisdom and humor. And I joined a support group for survivors of family financial abuse, finding solidarity in shared experiences. 6 months after the court case, I used part of my recovered funds to launch a small design studio specializing in branding for local artists and small businesses. I ran it from Grandpa's cottage, converting an old boathouse into my workspace. My first client was a local pottery maker whose work Grandpa had collected for years. When I showed him the branding package I'd created, his eyes filled with tears. "I always knew you'd do remarkable things, Laurel," he said. "If only you had the chance." "I have that chance now," I told him, squeezing his hand. "Because of you." The seasons changed. Fall painted the trees around the lake in brilliant oranges and reds. Winter brought snow that blanketed the cottage in peaceful white. Spring arrived with fresh green shoots and renewal. And Grandpa, Elias, grew weaker. I'd known it was coming. The doctors had warned me that his heart was failing gradually. But knowledge didn't make it easier to watch him fade. This man who had saved me, who had believed in me when no one else did. "Don't look so glum," he told me one evening as we sat on the porch, bundled in blankets despite the mild May air. "I've had a good run. Made plenty of mistakes, but a few things right too." "More than a few," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He patted my hand. "The trust fund was just money, Laurel girl. The real inheritance I wanted to give you was courage, self-belief." His blue eyes, still bright despite his pallor, held mine. "No one can take those from you. Not ever again." 2 weeks later, on a perfect summer morning, Grandpa Elias passed away peacefully in his sleep. I found him looking serene, a small smile on his face, the first light of dawn streaming through his window. The funeral was small, just as he would have wanted. Elliot and Jessica came with baby Laurel, now 6 months old and gurgling in her father's arms. A few of Grandpa's old friends attended. My mother arrived alone, standing at the back, not approaching me but nodding respectfully when our eyes met across the room. My father didn't come. I gave the eulogy, speaking not of inheritance or legal battles, but of a man who had taught me to fish when I was 7, who had encouraged me to draw when my practical parents pushed for accounting classes, who had shown me what unconditional love looked like. Grandpa Elias believed in living authentically, I told the small gathering. He built his success on hard work and integrity, but he measured his worth by the lives he touched, not the wealth he accumulated. In the end, his greatest gift wasn't financial security. It was showing me how to stand firm in my own truth. After the service, as people mingled quietly over coffee and sandwiches, Elliot approached with his daughter in his arms. "She has your eyes," I said, smiling at the baby who regarded me solemnly. "And hopefully your spirit," he replied. "Laurel, He swallowed hard. "Thank you for letting us be here today. For letting me say goodbye to him." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Little Laurel reached out and grabbed my finger, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. "Would you be her godmother?" Elliot asked suddenly. "I know it's a lot to ask, but I want her to know you. To learn from you." I looked at this tiny namesake, this new generation, who deserved better than the legacy of secrets and control I'd grown up with. "Yes," I said softly. "I'd be honored." The cottage now belonged to me. Grandpa had updated his will after our reconciliation to make sure there could be no challenges. I made it my permanent home, filling it with color and light, preserving the essence of him while making it my own. Willa joined my design studio as a business partner, bringing her financial expertise to complement my creative vision. Together, we built something neither of us could have accomplished alone. "Everhart and Matthews Design," she said one day, admiring our new sign. "Has a nice ring to it." "It does," I agreed, feeling a surge of pride. This was mine, earned through pain but built with joy. On what would have been Grandpa's 81st birthday, I received a small package from his attorney. Inside was an antique pocket watch with a note, to be delivered to Laurel Everhart on the 1st anniversary of Elias Everhart's passing. The watch was gold, intricately engraved, and still ticking steadily. On the inside of the case, freshly etched, were the words, You were always meant to lead. That evening, I took my journal to the end of the dock, dangling my feet in the cool lake water as the sun set. I opened to a fresh page and wrote, 2 years ago today, a simple question at my birthday dinner changed everything. Is the car still running smoothly? Since then, I've lost and found family, recovered what was stolen, and discovered strengths I never knew I had. They took the money. They lied. But I found something far more powerful, myself. I closed the journal and looked out over the water, watching the light play across its surface. The cottage behind me was warm with lamps I'd turned on earlier. My design drafts were spread across the dining table. My calendar was full of clients and commitments I'd chosen for myself. I thought of Grandpa Elias, of his courage and kindness. I thought of the pain and betrayal that had brought me here, and of the freedom I'd found on the other side of that darkness. Rising from the dock, I walked back to the cottage, my home now, in every sense of the word. Inside, I ran my fingers along the familiar walls, smiled at the photos I'd framed, breathed in the scent of the flowers I'd cut from the garden that morning. It's mine, I whispered to the quiet rooms. Finally, it's all mine. Not just the property or the possessions, but my life itself. My choices. My future. The things my parents had tried to control but could never truly own. As I moved through the cottage, turning off lights for the night, I paused at Grandpa's old desk where I now worked each day. On it sat the project I was most proud of, brochures for a new foundation I'd established to help young adults recognize and escape financial abuse. Its name? The Elias Fund, Building Independence. Because some legacies aren't measured in dollars, but in the lives they transform. And that was a truth my parents had never understood. What would you do if you discovered your entire adult life had been built on a foundation of lies? Who would you become once you broke free? Like and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming power from those who never should have taken it in the first place. The moment Grandpa Elias casually asked about a car he'd bought me, a car I'd never seen, I watched my parents freeze like criminals caught in searchlights. In that heartbeat of stunned silence, 26 years of gaslighting, financial guidance, and mysterious disappearing opportunities suddenly made terrible sense. My parents hadn't been protecting me. They'd been systematically robbing me of both my inheritance and my independence. What they failed to calculate was that the daughter they'd worked so hard to control had inherited her grandfather's spine along with his trust fund. They thought they were burying my future. They never expected I'd use it as foundation to build my own. The late June sun streamed through the bay windows of my parents' country home, casting long golden rectangles across the dining room table. My 26th birthday dinner was in full swing, complete with my mother's homemade lasagna, my favorite raspberry lemonade, and a chocolate cake decorated with candles that seemed to dance in the summer breeze coming through the open windows. To Laurel, my father, Dwight, raised his glass, his silver-flecked hair catching the light. 26 years of making us proud. May this be your best year yet. Everyone clinked glasses, and I smiled, trying to ignore the familiar knot in my stomach that formed whenever my father spoke about my accomplishments. The truth was, I didn't feel like I had much to celebrate. At 26, I was still living in the small apartment my parents had helped me find, just 15 minutes from their house. I was working at the graphic design firm where my father's college friend had given me a position, and I was still paying off the mountain of student loans that seemed to never decrease despite my monthly payments. My mother, Vivian, touched my arm. "Darling, you look tired. Is that job working you too hard?" Her concern seemed genuine, but there was something in her eyes, something controlling, that I'd grown accustomed to over the years.
Fine, Mom.
Just busy with the Peterson account. I took another sip of lemonade, hoping to change the subject. The cupcake toppers are getting rave reviews. The doorbell rang, and my mother's face lit up. That must be your grandfather. My heart warmed instantly. Grandpa Elias was the one relative I always felt truly understood me. He lived 3 hours away in a small lakeside cottage, and I hadn't seen him in over 2 years, not since before the pandemic, when he'd suffered a mild stroke. My parents had always made excuses for why we couldn't visit him more often, and when I'd suggested driving out to see him myself, my father had cited concerns about my old Honda's reliability for such a long trip. When Grandpa Elias walked in, I nearly knocked over my chair rushing to hug him. He seemed smaller than I remembered, more fragile, but his eyes, those bright blue eyes so much like my own, twinkled with the same mischief and wisdom. "There's my Laurel," he said, embracing me tightly. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." My brother Elliot arrived late as usual, with his wife Jessica in tow. He worked at my father's investment firm and had always been the golden child, financially stable, married, with a house in the suburbs that my parents had helped him buy as a wedding gift. I tried not to be bitter about it. Dinner resumed with the cheerful chaos of family gatherings. Grandpa Elias told stories about his fishing trips, Jessica shared news about her recent promotion, and my mother fussed over everyone's plates. For a moment it felt normal, peaceful even. Until dessert. As my mother began cutting slices of chocolate cake, Grandpa Elias turned to me with a casual smile. "So, Laurel, is that car I bought you still running smoothly?" The room went silent. My fork hovered midway to my mouth as confusion washed over me. "What car?" Grandpa's smile faltered. "The BMW I bought for your 24th birthday. You know, the one we picked out together when I visited you at college during your senior year?" He looked around at the suddenly still faces. "I transferred the money to your account 2 years ago, enough for the down payment and the first year of payments." I stared at him blankly. "Grandpa, I never got a car from you. I'm still driving my old Honda." My parents exchanged a quick glance that sent chills down my spine. My father cleared his throat. "Dad, I think you're confused. You never bought Laurel a car." Grandpa's eyes narrowed. "Dwight, don't try to tell me I'm confused. I may be old, but my mind is sharp as ever." He turned back to me. "Laurel, I sent you the paperwork. A blue BMW 3 Series. You said it was your dream car." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. My mother's hand shook slightly as she set down the cake knife. "It was right after my stroke," Grandpa continued, his voice growing firmer. "I wanted to make sure you had reliable transportation. I told your parents about it when they came to help me recover." My father's laugh sounded forced. "Dad, you were on a lot of medication after your stroke. You must have dreamed this up." But something in my grandfather's eyes, a certainty, a clarity, made my stomach twist. I looked at my mother, whose face had gone chalk white. My brother suddenly became very interested in his napkin. "I never got a car, Grandpa," I said softly. "I would have called you 1,000 times to thank you if I had." Grandpa Elias pushed his chair back slowly, his knuckles white around his cane. "Dwight, Vivian. A word.
Now."
They followed him into the kitchen, and though they spoke in hushed voices, the tension leaked through the swinging door. I sat frozen, my mind racing to make sense of what was happening. Jessica avoided my eyes. Elliot kept fidgeting with his wedding ring, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "You know something," I whispered to my brother. "What's going on?" Before Elliot could answer, Grandpa Elias stormed out of the kitchen, his face flushed with anger. Without a word to anyone, he grabbed his coat and headed for the door. "Grandpa, wait," I called, rushing after him. "Let me drive you home." He paused, his hand on the doorknob.
"No, Laurel."
"I need to think, but I'll be in touch very soon." He kissed my cheek and whispered, "Something isn't right here. Trust your instincts." After he left, my parents returned to the dining room with forced smiles. "Your grandfather has always been a bit eccentric," my father said smoothly. "Especially since his stroke." "What was he talking about?" I demanded. "Honestly, darling, we have no idea," my mother said, her voice honeyed but her eyes sharp. "You know how the elderly can get confused." But Grandpa Elias wasn't confused. He was many things, stubborn, opinionated, sometimes gruff, but never confused. That night, alone in my apartment, I couldn't sleep. Something about the whole evening felt wrong, like a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit. I remembered how quickly my parents had dismissed Grandpa's claims, how they'd tried to make him sound senile. I thought back over the past 2 years. There had been odd moments. Paperwork my father had asked me to sign when I was rushing between shifts at work, Mail that my mother had offered to sort for me when I was overwhelmed with deadlines. Bank statements I never seemed to receive any more after my parents suggested I go green with electronic statements. Then I remembered a certified letter Grandpa had mentioned in a phone call last year, something important he wanted to make sure I'd received. When I told him it never arrived, he'd sounded worried, but said he'd follow up. Somehow, in the chaos of work and life, I'd forgotten all about it. Sitting up in bed, I grabbed a notebook and began making a list. Find the certified mail receipt. Check bank statements for large deposits. Look for any paperwork with my signature. Call the DMV about car registration in my name. A car I never received. Money I never saw. Something wasn't just wrong, it was deliberately hidden. For the first time in my adult life, I began to wonder if the parents who claimed to want what was best for me had been lying all along. The morning after my birthday dinner, I called in sick to work. My hands trembled as I dug through my junk drawer, searching for any trace of that certified letter Grandpa had mentioned. Nothing. My apartment was small, a one-bedroom with barely enough space for my secondhand furniture and art supplies. My parents had insisted this place was perfect for now when I'd graduated college, steering me away from the nicer complexes across town. You don't want to overextend yourself financially, my father had said, patting my shoulder. Trust me, I know about these things. I'd been trusting them my whole life. Maybe that had been my first mistake. After an hour of searching, I found what I was looking for. Not the letter itself, but a USPS missed delivery notice from almost 2 years ago. The date matched the period right after Grandpa's stroke. I'd been working overtime that week, covering for a coworker. My mother had offered to check my mail. The notice was crumpled, as if someone had wadded it up before changing their mind and smoothing it out again. My mother's handwriting was in the corner. Taken care of.
But how?
And by whom? I drove to the post office, clutching the notice. The older clerk at the counter, Martin according to his name tag, looked at it skeptically. This is pretty old, he said. But I can check the tracking number. A few minutes later, he returned. Signed for and delivered on April 18th, 2023. Who signed for it? I asked, my mouth dry. He turned the screen so I could see. There was my name, in handwriting that looked similar to mine, but wasn't. That's not my signature, I whispered. Martin's expression softened with concern. If you think there's mail fraud involved, you should file a report. Do you remember anything about this delivery? It would have been a certified letter. He shook his head, then paused.
Wait.
Was it from an elderly gentleman? White hair, walks with a cane? My heart raced.
Yes.
That's my grandfather. I remember him. Nice man. He came in a few times asking about that package, seemed real concerned it get to you safely. Said it contained card documents and a bank check. A cold wave washed over me. So Grandpa hadn't been confused after all. My next stop was the DMV. After waiting for 2 hours, I finally reached the counter and explained that I needed to check if there were any vehicles registered in my name. The clerk tapped at her keyboard. Yes, there was a 2023 BMW 3 Series registered to you about 2 years ago. My voice cracked. It was transferred to another owner last year. She turned the screen, showing me the transfer document with my signature at the bottom. A signature I had never written. Can I get a copy of that document? 10 minutes later, I sat in my car staring at the paper. The forgery was good, but not perfect. Whoever had signed my name had made the L in Laurel too loopy, had crossed the T in Everhart too high. Small details no one would notice unless they were looking. I was definitely looking now. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. How are you feeling, sweetie? Do you need soup? As if everything was normal. As if they hadn't been lying to me for years. I ignored it and drove to my bank. The teller couldn't find any record of a large deposit from 2 years ago, which didn't surprise me. If my parents had intercepted Grandpa's letter, they could have intercepted anything. I'd like to see all account activity for the past 3 years, I said. We'll need to pull archives, the teller explained. That could take a few days. That's fine. I left my request and headed home, my mind spinning with possibilities, none of them good. That evening, my parents showed up at my apartment unannounced, bearing takeout and concerned smiles. My father's cologne filled my small living room as he settled onto my couch like he owned it. "We were worried when you didn't answer your mother's texts," he said, unpacking containers of food I hadn't asked for. My mother hovered nearby, straightening things on my bookshelf. "Are you feeling better? Your boss called looking for you." Of course he had. My father had gotten me the job. My father knew my boss. My father probably knew what I'd ordered for lunch most days. "I went to the DMV today," I said without preamble. The container in my father's hand paused midair. My mother's fingers froze on the spine of a book. "There was a BMW registered in my name 2 years ago. Sold last year. With my signature on the transfer." I kept my voice steady, though my heart hammered in my chest. "Except I never signed anything." My father set down the container carefully. "Laurel, I think you're confused." "Don't." The word came out sharper than I intended. "Don't tell me I'm confused. That's what you told Grandpa." My mother stepped forward, her face a mask of concern. "Sweetie, your grandfather has been struggling since his stroke. You know that. The post office remembers him sending me car documents and a check. Documents I never received because someone else signed for them." I met my father's eyes. "Someone forged my signature. Twice." My father's expression hardened. "You're jumping to wild conclusions based on your grandfather's delusions. Are you sure you're not coming down with something? You seem feverish." My mother pressed a cool hand to my forehead before I could pull away. "You're working yourself up over nothing, darling. Maybe you should lie down." Their gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I almost believed them. Almost. "Get out," I said quietly. "Laurel," my mother began. "Get out," I shouted, surprising even myself. "I need to think. Without you here trying to make me doubt myself." They left reluctantly, my mother pressing a kiss to my cheek that felt like a brand, my father warning me not to do anything rash. The apartment felt emptier, but somehow less suffocating after they were gone. I spent the next 3 days digging. I requested credit reports, bank statements, property records, anything that might show what had happened to Grandpa's gift. On the 4th day, I found it, the VIN number for the BMW and records showing it had been sold to a dealership in Riverside. When I called the dealership, they confirmed the sale. The car had been traded in by Elliot Everhart, my brother. I confronted him that night at his house while Jessica was at her book club. At first, he tried to deny everything, but Elliot had never been a good liar. "Mom and Dad said it was for your own good," he finally admitted, collapsing onto his porch steps. "They said you weren't ready for a car like that you'd be reckless, get into debt. So they had you sell it?" I was incredulous. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "They promised me a cut if I handled it quietly. $20,000 toward our down payment." He gestured at the house behind him, the house I'd thought they'd helped him buy as a wedding gift. "You sold my car, that Grandpa bought me, and used the money for your house?" My voice shook with rage. "Laurel, you have to understand. Dad said Grandpa was getting senile, making rash decisions. Dad said he was just protecting you." "Protecting me? By stealing from me? By lying to me?" Tears burned in my eyes. "By forging my signature?" Elliot flinched. "That was Dad's idea. He said you'd never notice." And I hadn't. Not until Grandpa's innocent question had blown everything wide open. "How much did Grandpa give for the car?" I demanded. Elliot swallowed hard. $50,000. And there was a trust fund. For your education, housing, startup money for your own design business someday. My knees nearly buckled. "A trust fund? How much?" "I don't know exactly. A lot. Dad became your trustee after Grandpa's stroke. He said it was all legal." I thought of the student loans crushing me each month. The tiny apartment. The entry-level job I couldn't leave because my parents had convinced me I wouldn't find anything better. "There's more," Elliot whispered, looking like he might be sick. "There's a power of attorney. Dad said you signed it when you were helping with Grandpa's medical paperwork after his stroke." But I hadn't. Another forgery. Another lie. I left Elliot's perfect house and drove straight to the only person who might have answers, the only person who'd tried to help me all along. Grandpa Elias lived in a modest lakeside cottage that had been in our family for generations. When I arrived unannounced, he was sitting on his porch, as if he'd been waiting for me. "I knew you'd figure it out eventually," he said, his voice weary but his eyes clear. "You've always been the smart one." Inside, over cups of tea that grew cold as we talked, he told me everything. How he'd set up a trust fund for me when I was born. How he'd added to it over the years, wanting me to have the freedom to pursue my dreams without financial worry. How my parents had gradually taken control after his stroke, using a power of attorney I'd never signed. "I trusted them," he said, his weathered hands trembling. "They were your parents. I never thought." "How much was in the trust, Grandpa?" I asked quietly. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Almost $400,000 by now, with interest." The room seemed to spin around me. $400,000. Money that could have freed me from debt, helped me start my own business, bought me a home of my own, all gone. "I'm so sorry, Laurel," Grandpa said, his voice breaking. "I should have protected you better." "It's not your fault," I whispered, though my mind was reeling. "You tried to tell me." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small recorder. After I started suspecting something was wrong, I recorded some conversations. Just in case. He pressed play. My mother's voice filled the room, sharp and defensive. "Dad, you need to stop interfering. We know what's best for Laurel. She's not ready for that kind of responsibility. She'd blow through that money in a year." "It's not your decision, Vivian," Grandpa's recorded voice answered. "I set that money aside for her future, not for you to control." "We're protecting her," my mother insisted. "She's always been impulsive, easily influenced. Remember that art school nonsense? She needs guidance." Art school. The dream I'd abandoned because my parents had convinced me it was impractical, unaffordable. But with Grandpa's trust fund, it would have been within reach all along. The recording continued, revealing years of manipulation and lies. When it finally ended, I sat in stunned silence. "What do I do now?" I finally asked. Grandpa reached for my hand. "You fight, Laurel. You get back what's yours. And I'll be right beside you." For the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet determination replacing the doubt that had been planted there by the people I should have been able to trust most. Grandpa Elias insisted I stay at his cottage that night. As I lay in the guest bedroom, surrounded by faded wallpaper and the gentle lapping of lake waves against the shore, I felt both broken and somehow stronger than I'd ever been. The next morning, Grandpa was already awake when I came downstairs, papers spread across his kitchen table. "I've been up since dawn," he said, not looking up from his work. "Been going through everything I could find about your trust." His face was drawn with fatigue, but his eyes burned with purpose. This was the man my mother rarely spoke about, the successful businessman who'd built himself up from nothing, who'd survived the loss of his wife young and raised my mother alone. The man who'd always believed in me. "I found something," he said, sliding a folder toward me. Inside was a copy of the original trust agreement he'd established when I was born, along with annual statements showing regular contributions. The most recent statement, dated just before his stroke, showed a balance of $387,453.78. "They kept saying you weren't responsible enough," Grandpa said bitterly. "But look at you, working 60-hour weeks at that firm, paying your own bills, never asking for handouts despite the loans they let you take." I stared at the numbers, trying to process the magnitude of what had been stolen from me. "The student loans," I said slowly. "I should never have needed them." Grandpa's face darkened. "The trust was specifically set up for your education. That's why I kept adding to it even after you graduated. I knew you wanted to get a master's degree someday." The master's degree in graphic design I'd abandoned because it seemed financially impossible. Another dream crushed by the fiction my parents had created. "There's something else," Grandpa said hesitantly. "Something I've been piecing together from bank records." He pulled out another file. "There was a condo purchased in your name about a year and a half ago. In Portland." My heart skipped. Portland, where I'd always talked about moving, where the design scene was thriving. A starter home, Grandpa continued. I'd mentioned to your father how you always loved that city. He must have used trust money for the down payment, put it in your name, and then sold it. I finished, feeling sick, without me ever knowing it existed. We spent the day reconstructing the timeline of theft. The car, the condo, the liquidated investments. The financial emergencies my parents claimed to have that always seemed to coincide with me signing paperwork I never fully read. They kept you dependent, Grandpa said quietly. Kept you close, kept you needing them. But why? The answer came to me suddenly, painfully clear.
Control.
Mom never wanted me to leave. Remember how she cried for weeks when I talked about studying abroad? How she got sick right before I was supposed to move into the dorms? Grandpa nodded slowly. And your father enabled it all. Probably benefited financially, too. As evening fell, I drove back to my apartment to collect some clothes and my laptop. I planned to stay with Grandpa while we sorted everything out. What I didn't expect was to find my parents waiting for me, sitting in my small living room as if they owned it, which, I realized with a jolt, they might actually have arranged. Laurel, my father began, his voice firm but gentle, the voice he used when closing business deals. We need to talk about these accusations you've been making.